Good morning. What an incredible crowd. I have to tell you, it is my favorite speech to give in Washington every year. Thank you, Christians United for Israel. You all are incredible. Give yourselves a hand. I have to say, I was reminded this morning as I prepared to give this speech of the last time I spoke before you. I had just broken my leg in Jerusalem. I had to come back here and get surgery, and I sat on the stage with my foot up as I delivered my speech to you all. And I'll just show you, we're good. You never know what happens in Israel. That's where I broke my leg. And it was a miracle that it happened there. It was treated by incredible doctors. And then I was heartened by an incredible crowd here at Christians United for Israel. I want to just mention also that Christians United for Israel and FDD, my organization, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, we have a wonderful friendship. I want to thank Pastor Hagee. I want to thank Shari. I want to thank the whole team for working with us on the side of justice. And I want to thank you for being part of this terrific organization. At FDD, we always talk about how we are happy warriors, that the world is not an easy place to live in right now, but that we need to get up every day looking for opportunities to win. And that's, I think, what we're all doing today. Now, speaking of win, you heard a little bit from my colleague, Jonathan Conricus. Now, he gave you a little bit of a sense of optimism about what is happening inside the Gaza Strip. I want to just build on that for a moment because I believe that we are now on the precipice of what could be an Israeli victory in the Gaza Strip. Now, you'll recall that at the beginning of this war, nobody thought that Israel would be able to win in Gaza. Everyone said that there would be thousands of Israeli dead, that they would be stuck in the sands of Gaza, that they would not be able to make progress against a brutal terrorist organization. Well, fast forward 9 months, and Israel has conquered 95% of Hamas-controlled Gaza. They are on the 5-yard line, folks. And here's what needs to happen. The United States needs to let Israel win. Now, I believe that there's one real key right now to Israel's progress on the battlefield, and you heard Jonathan speak about it briefly, but let me just explain that for months and months while Israel was fighting in Gaza, they found that they could not control the flow of fighters and the flow of weapons that continue to somehow make their way into the Gaza Strip. And as it turns out, there's one border, and only one border, that has been allowing those weapons and fighters to flow freely. And that border is with Egypt. And of course, we know that Egypt has a peace agreement with Israel dating back to the 1970s, and people would have always called it a cold peace. Well, it turns out it's been downright frigid because the Egyptians have been allowing tunnels to function beneath the ground, allowing weapons and fighters to come in to the Gaza Strip to help rearm Hamas, to actually help them mount the attacks of 10/7. Well, Israel, over the last 2 months, has gone in. They've taken control of that border area, and they are not going to let it go. And now, the supply lines of Hamas are cut off. And I got to tell you, I am not a military strategist, but I can tell you one thing. If you control your enemy's supply lines, your enemy is on the ropes, and that is what is happening to Hamas right now. They are on the ropes. Now, that's the good news. But we have some troubling news on the horizon right now, and that is my message to you this morning. That we have some significant tension along Israel's northern border. Everyone is, of course, aware of the catastrophe that took place on Saturday. There was a rocket that was fired out of southern Lebanon into the town of Majd al-Shams, a town of about 11,000 people, primarily the Druze minority, an Arab minority in Israel. And this is a crucial minority because the Druze are 100% loyal to the state of Israel. Many of their sons and daughters fight in the IDF, and it is an important constituency for the Israelis. And they suffered a horrific attack. They suffered the death of 12 teenagers as the result of a brutal attack carried out by Hezbollah. And now Israel has to make a choice. Now, of course, if you've been following this war from the beginning, you know that Hezbollah, which is Iran's most powerful proxy, they have been firing at Israel since October 8th. They have fired thousands of rockets and missiles and drones into Israel, and the Israelis have absorbed these attacks. In fact, they have moved 100,000 of their citizens out of the northern communities to keep them safe. Now, this is something that the Israelis have grown increasingly frustrated over for months. And part of the decision-making on the part of the Israeli government has been significantly influenced by the Biden administration. There was a moment where President Biden, we all remember when he flew to Israel after the 10/7 attacks, and the Israelis told him, they said, we don't want to fight in Gaza. We want to go north. We need to defeat Hezbollah because they're the most powerful proxy that the Iranians have. We need to defeat them. They're the key to the safety and security of the Jewish state. And do you know what the Biden administration said? They said, don't start wars that you can't finish. Now, here's the irony. The Israelis went south and they fought in Gaza, and then guess what happened? The Biden administration tried to restrain them there as well. In other words, there is no war that the Biden administration would like to see Israel finish, but that is not what is going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. So now the Middle East stands at the precipice of potentially a second major war. And this is what I want to talk to you about today for the next 10 minutes or so. There are options that the Israelis have as they consider how to respond to Hezbollah's murderous attack that took the lives of 12 Druze children. The first is to continue what Israel has been doing. And that is actually not a bad option. And let me explain. Over the last 7 months, as Israel has responded to Hezbollah aggression, what they have done is actually nothing short of miraculous. They have been responding to every attack. They don't initiate these attacks more often than not. But when they are attacked, they respond to the rocket launcher where they see the attack coming from, but then they usually attack something else. And that something else is usually a senior Hezbollah commander or a significant asset of Hezbollah. And what we've seen is actually the liquidation of somewhere between 350 and 400 senior Hezbollah officials since this war began. And if Israel decides that this is the right course of action to keep things at a lower boil, they will continue to get the better of Hezbollah in every altercation because Israel is, of course, the stronger, more professional military. Now, the Israelis, however, have a challenge. Their people are growing frustrated. They want answers. The Druze community, after suffering the loss of 12 of their young men and women, they want answers. And so everyone is looking to the Netanyahu government to respond with overwhelming force. And it seems all but certain that Israel will comply. They are a government that still responds to the needs and the will of their people. They are, of course, the only democracy in the Middle East. And so when Israel does respond, we need to ask ourselves, what happens next? So, option one, Israel responds with overwhelming force. They attack, whether it's tonight or tomorrow night. We've actually heard the Israelis have warned every major airline not to fly to Lebanon from now until Friday, in expectation of an attack. One is imminent. And so the question then becomes, what does Hezbollah do? Option one is they decide that a war with the most powerful military in the Middle East is simply not worth it, and that they decide to absorb the attacks that Israel launches with the idea of trying to maintain the status quo. But let me remind you, for all who may be optimistic about such a scenario, Hezbollah only exists for one reason, and one reason only. Hezbollah exists to wage war against the one and only Jewish state. And so the idea that Hezbollah will stand pat and not respond is not likely based in reality. So that brings us to option two. Israel responds with overwhelming force, and Hezbollah begins to strike back. Now, my friends in Lebanon, when I speak to them about the current situation, they're somewhat optimistic. They say, well, we think that maybe, just maybe, that this war will only be fought in southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River, about 10 miles up from the Israeli border, and that Hezbollah would only respond to northern Israel, where the houses have been cleared out, and that this would be a limited war. But let me ask you folks, you all follow the Middle East. When's the last time Iranian proxies and terrorist groups agreed with a gentleman's agreement with Israel to only fight in a limited area, in a limited scope? That is just something that I don't believe is likely. So then that brings us to option three. Option three is that Israel begins to respond tonight, tomorrow, whenever that response comes, and Hezbollah responds in kind. Now, let me remind you, for those who are not aware, Hezbollah has an arsenal of roughly 200,000 rockets. This is 7 times what Hamas had at the beginning of the 10-7 war. They have a significant arsenal, folks. They are considered by the Israelis to be as powerful as a mid-sized European military, about the kind of strength of the Czech Republic, right? A true military, and the Israelis are concerned. They're also concerned about the fact that Hezbollah has amassed an arsenal of 1,500 precision-guided munitions, PGMs as they're known. Now, everybody knows that most of the rockets that we see fired at Israel across the Middle East, most of them are not accurate, right? We see this all the time, that some of the rockets are fired out of the Gaza Strip and they'll actually land back in the Gaza Strip because they are not accurate. Some of them overshoot their targets in Israel, and the Iron Dome only shoots those that are actually on their way to hitting something of value inside Israel, but they don't target most of those rockets. And it's because their rockets are not accurate. Hezbollah has fixed that problem with the help of their patron in Iran. This is by far the most serious threat that Israel could face short of an Iranian nuclear weapon. We're talking about weapons that have the potential to hit the chemical plant in Haifa, the nuclear facility in Dimona, skyscrapers in Tel Aviv. The Israelis are nervous, and for good reason, because if this war breaks out, a full-blown war between Israel and Hezbollah, it could last for months, folks. It could make the last 9 months look like child's play. And this is the war that Israel is now bracing for and that they are preparing for. And I cannot understate this or overstate it. This is a serious moment for the Jewish state, and they need your prayers, they need your help, and I am so pleased that you are all here today to hear about this. Now, there is, of course, other there's another scenario, that this war begins to play out. And it's the war that we all fear. And then Israel starts to win. Because, in my view, there's no other way. Israel's got nowhere to go. Their people say it all the time. They can't lose. There's zero margin for error in Israel because they cannot afford to lose one war. So they begin to fight this war with Hezbollah and they begin to win. But now ask yourself, how will Iran react to that? Iran does not want to see its most powerful proxy lose a war. And so what they may start to do is to activate some of the other proxies that they have across the region. The Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, the terrorist groups that are in the West Bank, they all could begin to activate, not to mention Iran itself, which, as we all recall, fired 300 missiles and drones into Israel in mid-April. And thankfully, maybe with a little bit of help from above, Israel knocked down 99% of those rockets. But this scenario that I mentioned to you right now is what the Israelis would call the Ring of Fire. That, folks, is a full regional war. And the Israelis, of course, are ready to fight any war, but they need our help. They need America's leaders to lead. And you are here in Washington now to make sure that we speak in one voice, that Israel needs the weapons, they need the political support, they need the diplomatic support, and they need us. And so for that, I thank you so much for being here and for raising your voice during Israel's time of need. Now, I want to just end on this note. All of this can be prevented, all of it, because all of this comes down to one bad actor. We might say that we want to see Hamas defeated or Hezbollah defeated or the Houthis, but we need to remember who started all of this. And that is the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that is the entity that needs to be targeted, not just by the Israelis, but by the United States and by all countries of conscience around the world. Folks, our policy in Washington needs to change. It needs to change in a big way because we keep telling Israel to fight with one hand tied behind its back against all of these little proxies, when what we should be doing is unleashing the full power of the Israeli military with the help of ours to defeat a partner of the Chinese, to defeat a partner of the Russians. They are part of an axis of evil. We need to understand, folks, that there is a bigger war that is underway. Israel, as always, is the canary in the coal mine. They are on the front lines of something that could get much bigger. And it is now up to us to help Israel mount that fight. And for that, I thank you for being here. God bless you all. Thanks for what you do.